Hello, are we on? I think we're on. I think so. Anybody out there can confirm they can see and hear me? Anybody there this evening? Oh, hello. Hi, Fiona. Thank you. Hi, Josephina. Thank you. I'm not just talking into the abyss. That's a good thing. Anybody else ready to get going? How's everybody? Everybody doing okay? Okay, sure, we'll get going. I'm going to be getting alerts now. Wait now a second. Hello. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Alison. Okay, so everybody can see and hear. So that's a good start, I guess. We're getting going with that much. It's the first part, I guess. So today we're going to be talking about stress busting. So it's a pretty big area, and we're really, kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg on this one. But just to talk a little bit about what stress is, and its effects, and then looking at that to work out the best stress busting solutions then to hopefully help your dog and help us, because we basically have the same stress physiology that our dogs do. Hi, Finn and Linda, thank you. So a lot of this is applicable to us and to other species too. So the first thing then that we'll talk a little bit about is what is stress itself. So we talk about stress all the time, and when we use the term stress, we're usually hi Christy, we're usually talking about the bad effects or the negative effects of stress. But stress covers a whole continuum of behavior and physiological, biological, neurochemical responses. So what I tend to say for people to do is replace the word stress with the word challenge. And so, it's easier for us to understand, and sometimes kind of get that challenge helps at a kind of on a continuum at various kind of levels. So what we say about stress then is that anytime the body is challenged, and whether the body has behavioral tools to deal with that, and in that case we have good stress or beneficial stress that kind of helps with driving performance. It allows us to learn a little bit better. It narrows our focus so we can concentrate on specific things. And that good stress is called eustress, EUST or ESS. So, but if we don't have behaviors or skills, skills are behaviors, if we don't have skills to meet those challenges, well, then we might be subjected to the bad or disadvantageous stress that we refer to as distress. So generally, when we're talking about stress, usually what we're talking about is we're talking about the bad stuff, the distress. But there are lots of benefits to stress. It's literally a lifesaver. So stress-related behaviors are adaptive behaviors. Animals do them or have evolved the ability to do them because it's kept them alive. You get stressed about something, you get an inkling about something, you move away or you avoid that thing or that other animal or whatever, and that allows you to survive. So your offspring are more likely to do that. And this is why mammals and probably other species as well have a really well-developed stress response that's inbuilt in the brain, and in this very kind of ancient part of our brain in the middle of our heads. So when we're talking about stress, we're not always talking about bad things. We know that a certain amount of challenge is important in order to drive performance and to allow learning to happen. And we often hear talk about exposing puppies to an appropriate level of stress in order to shape behavioral development. So there are lots of advantages as well, but we know that there are disadvantages to stress as well. Chronic stress is damaging, and we talk about chronic stress in terms of human health all the time. We are a chronically stressed group of organisms. And so what really happens there with chronic stress is that the more the brain is exposed to stress, the more sensitive to stress it becomes. So basically, the more stressed the brain kind of gets, the better it becomes at responding to stressors, and the earlier it will respond to stressors, and the more and bigger stress responses we will see. So the parts of the brain that are most sensitive to stress, the more it's exposed to distress, will become better at doing that. And what we see is a decrease in kind of neuron density and complexity. So neurons are brain cells. So we see a decrease in the connections between brain cells in areas of the brain that regulate emotional responses. And we see an increase in complexity in those connections in places in the brain that are more sensitive to stress. So more stress begets more stress. Basically, you become better at responding to stressors and become more efficient. So these stress responses get bigger, they get more efficient. The animal starts to respond to stress responses earlier in the interaction, and obviously then the better that becomes, the more changes to the brain happen. So the harder it is to help our animals better cope. So the harder it becomes to help our animal to better deal with stressors and the world around them, because we can't completely shield them from stress. Remember, a certain level of stress or challenge is good, and we need it, and it drives performance, and all those things are very important for us. But as soon as we're at a point where we don't have those behavioral skills, those coping skills to deal with those stressors, it can become damaging. So stress responses happen along a continuum. And really what stress responses do is they allow the animal to become more aware of the surrounding environment, giving them the biological tools to deal with whatever's coming. So whatever challenge is going to face them, that's what the stress responses do. And there are lots of different types of stress. So there's psychological stress, physiological stress, and so on. And different types of stress responses kind of go with different types of stressors. So we see different combinations of neurochemicals, for example, released depending on the type of stressor that we're dealing with. But the more stressed an animal becomes, the more stressed a dog becomes, the less individual their stress response becomes. And that's because the kind of parts of the brain that make us individual and allow us to express our thoughts and feelings and individual kind of attitudes to the world become inhibited the more stressed we become. So we start to see neurologically cheaper behaviors that require less brain involvement, so less complex brain involvement, that the upper brain up here, the less of that is actually involved when we start to see these very, very much more species typical stress responses. So what sort of stress-related behaviours have you seen, or what sort of responses do you associate with a stressed dog? Anybody got any ideas out there? So we know that stress responses often start with kind of automatic responses, autonomic responses. My internet's too slow to play the live, but I'll be back to watch the recorded version. Oh dear. We're always victims of the tech. We can do all the preparation we like, but it just comes down to how the internet is going to work in the end, which we have very little control over. So the dog might run away. So that's quite a complex behavior, but fleeing is absolutely part of that stress response. 100%, absolutely. So the dog might run away, absolutely. So we call that fleeing. What a great subject. Gonna need to listen to this again and again. Panting, right? Okay, good. So what happens then when we start to see stress responses is the body is preparing us to flee. The body is preparing us to deal with this challenge. So we start to see kind of physiological responses. So we might see an increase in respiratory rate. So we might have panting, for example. So barking, lunging, lip licking, absolutely. So we might have vocalizing of lots of different types. Lunging, so very much distance increasing behavior. Go away from me, trying to get the stressor to go away. Lip licking, absolutely. We can see lip licking. Finn runs away. Tongue hanging out. Yeah, and do you know something with that one? Let's have a look at what the tongue often looks like. So often with a really, really distressed dog. So, stress is building, and so the heart rate increases, the respiratory rate increases, the body is pumping more oxygen around to help us cope and prepare for what's coming next. So we might see some panting, we might see some deeper breathing, and that often means that the lower jaw drops and we have tongue hanging out. The more stressed the dog becomes, we often see this kind of spatulated shaped tongue. So there's tension down through the tongue, the part of the tongue that's kind of connected in the mouth, and then the bit that kind of hangs out is kind of this kind of spoon shape. Yeah, that's a good observation. We might have some pacing, and absolutely we'll see pacing where fleeing might not be possible. So that dog might be checking out the boundaries, for example. They might be just pacing because all of that physiological stuff that gets them ready for movement is happening, but they don't have somewhere for that to go. We might have barking, lunging, growling, lip licking, absolutely. So all of this sort of stuff in the context of the animal trying to get the stressor to move away. So possibly trying to make themselves look scarier, to say, go away, go away, go away. I'm not going to be able for this interaction. Panting heavily, absolutely. Barking. Tail tucked, whale eye. Pelar erection, so that's hackling, so where you have hair raising up along the spine. It often comes up at the neck, but it can come up anywhere, and lots of different dogs, they have different versions of that. So they might tail tuck, so protecting the kind of the extremities, the delicate parts of the body. So that's sometimes why you'll see dogs crouch and lie down. Whale eye. So whale eye is something we see in dogs because we can't see a whole lot of white of the eye in dogs. So when they move their pupil to watch the stressor, but keep their head over something that they're trying to defend access to or protect access to, we might see whale eye. So this kind of half moon shape of the white of the eye that can be very distinct, particularly in a darker faced dog. The pelar erection, then, this is an automatic response. So we don't necessarily have complete conscious control over that. So we'd have the hair standing up, and that tells us that there's a level of arousal happening. The body is going, I'm getting ready for this. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be some sort of aggressive responding necessarily, but certainly means the body is preparing for a big physiological challenge that might be coming. They may hide away, absolutely. Reactivity. So that's an interesting term because that's a bit of a label, right? So what I see, what I think that might mean might be something else to somebody else, but certainly I think the lunging, barking that we often associate with that kind of behavior, moving forward, could absolutely fall under that. If the interest is slow, you can try decreasing video quality. So who was there? I think it was Molly. There's a suggestion there for you. I know nothing about tech. David is suggesting that you try to reduce the video quality. I don't know how to do that though, David. You might reply to Molly's comment up there and give her some tips, because I don't know how that works. Lip licking and yawning, looking away. So all of these things that are about putting a barrier, a very a social barrier between themselves and the stressor. So looking away, yawning, increasing the amount of oxygen we're taking in, lip licking. So that's become a kind of a specialized signal from more kind of aggressive responding, yawning, lip licking, slow eye blinks. Yeah, so that just kind of trying to put a barrier. I'm not here, I'm not ready to interact, looking away. Heart rate increased. Absolutely. We have all of these physiological responses. So our heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases, the release of certain neurochemicals releases, other things slow down, other physiological responses slow down. So for example, digestion, non-essential, non-survival related physiological responses slow right down when they're stressing. And that makes sense because, don't worry too much about eating when your life is under threat. Fidgeting, right. So fidgeting is one of the F's along the fidget, flee, freeze, fight, that kind of spectrum that we often talk about. I'm also getting stressed because my intranet is bad too. Oh no. Tell us what signals you're showing that tell us you're stressed. Excessive salivation, absolutely, we can see that. And again, that's got to do with the panting, but it's also got to do with these physiological responses that are raising, getting ready to prepare the body for what it might be have to deal with. That spoon tongue. Yeah, so I call it spatulated tongue. So that's interesting. So there might just be a language difference there. Spoon tongue, absolutely. My girl drinks water, right, exactly. That's a really good thing. So we see that quite a lot, and that can be a little bit, the dog is looking, how can I control stuff around me? Oh, I know what to do with water. I'm going to do that. It's a bit of a displacement activity. So displacement activity is a behavior that we're doing when we're kind of trying to buy time to see what we're going to have to do to deal with the environment. And some of those, like yawning and shaking off, and some of those other things that we've mentioned can also act as displacement activities. Tail either tucked or curled over the back. Right. Now, Susan, that's a good point, and that's something that we're going to talk about. When dogs are stressed, their behavioral responses can kind of go up and be more extroverted and out there in the world, and they're wearing their heart on their sleeve and we know exactly how they're feeling. So that might be our tail up over the back. And some dogs go down. So everything, they go introverted into themselves, they want to, curl away, and that might be our tail tucked, this dog that's actively trying to say, I'm not into this. Paw sweating, right, exactly. So again, just like with our panting, under extreme kind of physiological challenge. And that could be, that they've just been running around a bit in a hot day, but also we can see some paw sweating as well. So you'll see little wet paw prints, on the ground and stuff like that. Shaking, absolutely. That trembling. So those electrical signals are going, the animal is getting ready to, be coiled and to spring off should they need to. A tense body, absolutely the same reason. They might try to look smaller, so they look like less of a threat, might not want to attract the social attention. Redirecting, right, exactly. So sometimes if they can't get to the object of their stress, they might have to take that out on something else. And we might see that if a dog is like behind a fence or a barrier or on a lead or some other way, can't move away or can't kind of get to the stressor or can't carry out the behavior and use the tools they have in the way that they think they need to. Biting or mouthing frantically, absolutely. And we see that in those dogs that tend to go up. They often start to seek things out, holding stuff in their mouth, biting things, mouthing things. They might mouth people, they might, tug sleeves, mouth arms, jumping up, that kind of frantic behavior. Yawning, absolutely, that kind of displacement, increasing the amount of oxygen that's coming in. Yawning absolutely can be. I'd be stressed doing these lives, yeah, me too. 3 dots on the top of the screen. Okay, for Molly, 3 dots on the top of the screen. I have a different screen when you're presenting, so I don't know how that works. They can become more frantic, so we see more kind of fidget type behavior. Up on toes, yeah, absolutely, they can go up, and again, everything can increase. They roll forward on their shoulders. Watching on my phone, no problems. Oh, okay, well, that's better then. It's in the house, we'll grab a Kong. Right, yeah, so they get something and they mouth it or hold it, and certainly lots of dogs seem to have a kind of a calming effect with that. It seems to be something that they can seek out, and that may come from the fact that, chewing stuff activates kind of gastrointestinal stuff, and that can cause release of dopamine and serotonin, and we're just beginning to understand those links between the gut and the brain, along these kind of connections that are present in the body, and we're just beginning to look at that a little bit more. Rory's tail goes way up, yeah, absolutely. Hypervigilance, right, and that's something that stress can do. So what stress can do is it can suddenly cause the animal to be watching everything. They want to try and take in everything. And for some individuals, it can narrow their focus. So they just take in one thing. So you've seen your dog maybe stalking like a squirrel or something like that. And, you could be waving sirloin steak in front of them, running around naked in front of them, and they wouldn't even see you. It's just this narrowed focus that can happen. So it can go by both ways. Yeah, they can absolutely be staring, particularly in social situations. And again, that's an example of those 2 comments back to back there, one going one way, hypervigilance, trying to watch everything in the environment, and then the other going the other way, narrowing focus and staring at something really intensely. So those are really good examples. Well done. Some really nice observations there. Suddenly sniffing. So this is another, Tracy saying suddenly sniffing everything. So this is another kind of displacement behavior, isn't it? And like scratching as well. You're listing all the displacement behaviors. So all of those are definitely related to stress in some contexts. In some contexts, not. Dogs yawn when they're tired. They scratch when they're itchy. They sniff when there's poo there. And that might be nothing to do with kind of any sort of challenge. So what are some stress behaviors that people often mistaken for comfort or something else, but actually could be much more likely to indicate that the dog's experiencing a high level of stress? Can you think of any of those, guys? So stress related behaviors that people misinterpret. What sort of examples can you come up with there? Anybody got any ideas there? What do you think? So lots of these are, one of the things about discussing signaling behavior is that it's contextual, right? And it's terribly individual. So one dog in one context could be doing something that could indicate it's having a hard time. That same dog in another context could be doing the same thing, but the behavior is indicative of something completely different. So there are lots of, one of the great things to do when you're learning about signaling is to watch popular kind of so-called viral videos with dogs in them. And we often see behaviors that are being interpreted maybe as being funny or entertaining, or that the dog is being loving or affectionate or whatever. And when we look at the context and we actually break down the signaling and look at the ingredients, all the different parts of the dog's body that are telling us how they're feeling, we can actually see a dog that's way more stressed. And I think one of the most common ones in relation to stress, and some people brought up like fidgeting and frantic behavior, is this idea that excitement means that the dog is happy. So dogs that are jumping around and being giddy or chasing things, that they're actually experiencing, positive emotional responses to the environment. And oftentimes that can be, a really low level, the starting entry level to, a dog that's exhibiting way more distress or feeling way more distress. And the good thing about that level of behavior is that the dog is still using behavior to try and cope with the environment. And that's really important, because we know that the more and more they're pushed, the more they may become what we often say, shut down. They show less behavior. And that's certainly indicative of a dog that's experiencing probably a higher level of stress. Again, it's all very individual, and things like that, but in general. So can anybody think of any behaviors that are often dogs and babies, the whole thing? Oh my god, loads. You guys are geniuses. Everything in context with the dog in front of you. Absolutely. Treat the dog in front of you. Very, very important. So being very still, absolutely. Lip licks, yeah. One of my dog needs and sucks a blanket when she is stressed. So there's more kind of sensory feedback and that oral feedback. What sort of dog is that, Alison? Fooling around, yeah, exactly, yeah. So that's a really good one there. Beja, you can correct me how I pronounce your name, apologies. But fooling around, maybe taking his invitation to play, and that's a really good observation. So dogs will jump in almost in that play bow, but they're super tense, and then they jump out again. It's almost conflicted. It's like, I want to, but I don't want to. I want to, but I don't want to. Often misinterpreted as play. Good observation. Everything comes with the dog in front of you. Yeah, absolutely. Jumping up and guess may not be greedy, and super extra excitement greeting people. That's possibly not happy. That's probably related to being a little bit conflicted and possibly wanting a little bit of a break, or needing a bit of a break. Jumping up, clowning around, absolutely. Todd is wanting cuddles, yes. We think that as soon as a dog shows us any sort of interest, we must touch it. We're primates and we grip things and we grab things. And dogs are like, wait a second, I'm not into that. Rolling over and offering a belly. That's like, oh God, it's the most common one, isn't it? Dogs are actually saying, you know what, I want some relief. And we go in there and we do the primate thing. Dogs and babies, all of the interactions, almost all of them online. Hightail, people think it's bright and happy, but dog could be on the absolutely. Yawning is a classic one. People think that they're tight. Zoomies is a really, really, really commonly thought happy thing, when actually the dog is probably looking for some relief from stress. Tap hits, people think they want belly rubs. Yeah. Humping, often misinterpreted, can be stress related. It's a really funny social behavior, but yeah, absolutely. Licking people in the face, yep. What happens when dogs lick us in the face? We do that, so it becomes a really effective distance increasing signaling. Head turning away, stillness. Oh, it's a collie. Okay, yeah, we see it quite commonly in collies, that sucking behavior. Mouth pinned back, it's not smiling. Good observation, because we see a lot of videos where the dog is like pulled back here, all back here is all pulled up, and we can see a wrinkle back here and everything. Refusing food, yeah. And that again, Basha, thank you for that. Refusing food, yes, and that is again because the digestive system is slowing down, so it doesn't make sense to be looking for food and foraging when shit is getting real over here. Get out of there. My young collie who's returned, just constant circling and looping, checking back in, and that probably increases in intensity maybe when he's a little bit more worried. Wagging tail, yeah, absolutely. Excited dog and stressed dog look similar? Question mark. Yes, Jane, they do. Yeah, I think a lot of the times when we see exciting dogs, what we are interpreting as an excited dog, we're probably looking at a dog that's beginning to experience some level of stress. Yeah. And I will put in some resources into the stuff for this that You can have a look at some signals, because that's what it's really about. It's about, and it's less about labeling the dog and saying that the dog is stressed or excited or happy or whatever, interpretation we're making, and more about looking at the ingredients. What are all the different parts doing, and what does that add up to? What recipe does that add up to? So, so we have lots of examples there. We've made some really, really good observations there. And obviously there's an excellent understanding of stress responding amongst everybody here. Yeah, clingy dogs, so wanting to stay, I'm here, Ruby, wanting to stay close to their person, and we become their safe base, and kind of referentially safe as well. So they might look to us for information about how to deal with the world. So is this going to be scary? Is this going to be an okay situation? So dogs under stress can go up or down. And my dog, so Decker's not here today, he's off because people are cooking again, so he's doing that. He got out there quickly, he escaped, to stick with that. But my dog goes up. He's an up dog. I have never seen him shut down I've got him nearly 9 years. I've never seen him shut down or come down or go into himself ever. Not once in all of that time. Everything is out here and up. And the problem with that is that people are more likely to view that behavior as bad. And that predisposes them to use kind of punishment-based approaches, nastier equipment, aversive-based approaches to dealing with those dogs. There's usually more empathy or concern, or sometimes they just don't see it at all, those dogs that go down and into themselves. So those dogs are often get more kind of sympathy or more empathy from pet owners. So we've looked at at this, and we've said, well, what do stressed dogs look like? And I think we have to be careful with the way we use labels. I mean, we label dogs before they're even born. We have some sort of expectation for them. They're going to be a gun dog. They're going to be assistance dogs. They're going to be a pet dog. They're going to be this, that, or the other. These expectations that are to fulfill human purposes. So what sort of labels? We've seen like reactive can be one a lot of the time. Clingy can be another one. What sort of labels are used to describe dogs that are experiencing stress? What sort of labels do you think that you've heard or you might have used? I mean, we use labels all the time. We don't even think about it. We also might use labels amongst ourselves, as kind of a shorthand. I know what you mean when you say that, and that kind of thing. My older girl gets scared when stressed and hides away. My younger girl gets super aroused, so there's another use of a term, and presents what could be considered as naughty. I think that's a good observation to make, and you have the two extremes in your house there, so that one dog goes into itself and hides away and wants the world to just leave it alone, and the other dog gets big and out there, and all of those sorts of things. And again, we might think of that behavior as bad or naughty. So kind of labels that we use, we might label dogs that are exhibiting stress as being boisterous, aggressive a lot, anxious, bad, naughty, dominant, that good old favorite there, the dreaded aggressive, absolutely all sorts of connotations to these terms because they're labels. They don't describe behavior. The dog might be described as stubborn. Yeah, people love that one. All of these are suggesting that, the dog isn't always aggressive. The dog isn't always dominant. The dog isn't always stubborn or naughty or bad or, insert label here. So we have to start kind of retraining ourselves to think about the language we use to describe them when we describe behaviors. So instead of our interpretation, so what do we think the dog is feeling or experiencing, what is the dog doing? So when I say that can be difficult. Yeah, alpha, they love that one too. It goes hand in hand with dominant, doesn't it? And I think arousal has come up there. And arousal is this weird term that I think has overtaken the term drive in dog training. We used to talk about dogs being drivey or high drive or low drive or whatever. Who knows what it means? Yeah, so people will say things like untrainable. You mean you're not good enough. You don't have good enough training skills. I think is what's often meant there. Really submissive, right? The opposite, isn't it? Submissive and subordinate and all those terms. Yeah, good suggestions there. These are all terms that we could probably lose from our language when we're talking about dogs. So instead asking what is the dog doing? So tell me about what are different parts of the body doing? What are its ears doing? What's its mouth doing? Where it relative to a stressor? Those sorts of things are important. So arousal comes up. when we talk about that. And arousal, really, the definition of that is just physiological and psychological state of being awake. So why has that become such a term that we use to label dogs with? So why has it become such a big deal? And I suppose arousal we kind of use right now is a kind of a measure of the effects of stress on the dog in that moment. So we say that the dog's arousal is increasing, and that might mean that dog is becoming, that there's more stress behavior, so the dog that goes up, or it can also mean that the dog is doing less behavior. They're coming into themselves a little bit more. So the thing about arousal really is it's just a descriptive term. It's another label to describe how stressed the dog is doing. And I think, again, it's valuable to describe what the dog is doing. It's kind of an overused term for sure in dog training right now. It's used a lot. But the thing is those early levels of stress, that kind of fidget flirt level where they can kind of be a little bit more frantic and it's all getting a little bit more crazy, that can feel good. And it feel goods, reactive is a really common label to describe stress-related behavior in dogs. So like this umbrella term that describes so much stuff that could be anything. But that initial stuff feels good. That initial activity, that initial spike in arousal, that initial spike in stress feels good. And we know that. We know that lots of people seek this out. So there's a good question. Can there be positive arousal? Absolutely. This is the problem with us talking about stress and arousal. We think of the negative effects straight away, but it happens along a continuum. So up to a point, and this is very individual, it's called drive, right? Up to a point, it's incredibly beneficial to the body. It hones our focus, it prepares all our muscles and physiological processes, gets the right neurochemicals pumping that improve learning, improve our ability to retain information. So all of those good things happen as we come into stress or arousal. But the problem is if we don't facilitate the animal with behaviors that allow it to deal with that and stop it going way over the top, then that animal may experience the negative effects, and certainly on a repetitive basis. And this can be happening at a breed level. It can happen at a species level. We can talk about it in dogs in general, but it's really about the individual and the context that they're in at that moment. So we have selectively bred dogs to have stress systems or arousal systems that will be triggered by different types of stimulation. So we might use a really commonly used example like sight hounds and scent hounds, for example. Sight hounds are probably going to be more interested in things that are moving about on the horizon, whereas scent hound is going to maybe more interested in things that are down here on the ground where they have their nose involved. And so the sort of stimulation that causes their systems to come up and suddenly become aware of the world and start to prepare them physiologically will differ. And these, of course, can be learned as well over time. So the dog learns that a particular cue in the environment, something happening in the environment, tells them to get ready. So, for example, a very simple example might be the dog hears your car arriving outside in the driveway. And so what we're asking there is, well, what do we expect the dog to feel? What is the dog expecting to feel in that situation? They're going to feel excited. They might start to feel a little bit loss of control, which is why we might have some frantic behavior, where they might grab something and people think that the dog is greeting them with something in their mouth, bringing a toy to them, and really what the dog is doing is, I just need a little bit of control, like just maybe using like one of those stress toys or something like that. So different types of dogs and different individuals will show different sorts of behavior when they're aroused, and the more aroused they become, the more likely we're going to see an intensifying in the sort of these kind of canid motor patterns that we see. So we talk about sight hounds and scent hounds. So sight hounds might become more intense in their stalking and chasing. Scent hounds might become more intense in their tracking. And of course, this worked for them when they were doing their job that we developed them to do. But when they're pets, or when we want them to do other things, we don't want them to be hunting right now, we want them to do another job, well then those those behaviors can start to become a problem for people, really. And this is why when we talked about enrichment yesterday, it's so important that we're providing acceptable outlets for these sorts of behaviors. So hard to imagine that don't want to restrict her access to water, but after measuring how much she drinks some days, vets said to be careful. Right, so I think one of the things you're talking about have been painted with dogs. People walking have been painted with dogs. Oh yeah, okay. If you're talking about really specific stress responses that your dog does, the water, we do have to be careful with drinking a lot of water. But one of the things that we're going to talk about is we're going to start talking about collecting data again, which is like the thing I talk about all the time that drives everybody nuts. But we want to know, what are the things in the environment? What are the things that are happening that cue that water drinking, cue the collie nipping that Susan's talking about, cueing, you've already spotted that, Amy there, that people, the presence of people have been paired with dogs. So she reacts to people now as well. So she sees a person, she goes, oh, that person probably has a dog. So what does the dog expect to feel when they experience those cues? And that's the really important question to start to ask. So start to collect data on that. So one of the things, and this comes up a lot with shoves in our face. My anxious boy always brings us a toy and shoves it in our face. Would that still be like a stress ball to him, even though we are family? It can be, because losing control, getting really excited and losing control can feel worrying. We know that ourselves. I mean, that's how we would often describe stress, that we start to lose control. But the thing is, all of this is influenced by and refined by learning. So we might have an interaction with that toy, with that dog, when he brings it to you, and it's become a really cool way for him to control that interaction. So, I bring the toy, that's a cue, and they do the tuggy or they throw the toy, and I know exactly how this interaction is going to go. So it gives them a little bit of controllability and a little bit of predictability. So whereas it might have started as being kind of driven by being kind of stressy or worried about something, it's actually may become, if we keep it in a pattern and predictable for him, and this is Kirsty's dog, that may become an absolutely manageable sequence of events for him that makes it very predictable and easier for him to deal with. So I think these are good observations to make, but we start to collect the data. So what is the dog doing? What's just happened? What happens just after? These are good pieces of information to have. And I guess one of the things that tends to come up is, particularly if we have a dog that goes way up when they become stressed, is we start to think, okay, we need to supply these dogs with more and more repetitive and high octane exercise. So the ball chuckers come out, or they're put into situations with other dogs and there's just like raucous, boisterous play that happens. And this sort of stuff, again, often goes with excitability being interpreted as happiness, I guess. And we have to be really, really careful with that. The dog is not necessarily choosing to engage in these behaviors, certainly at any cognitive level, but they're participating in these kind of installed motor patterns, chasing something, biting something. So just because the dog is excited doesn't mean that the dog is happy. And I think that common adage, is a tired dog a good dog, comes into play here. Kind of commonly engaging dogs in really high energy, repetitive activities for extended periods, getting them all wound up. So getting them up. Physiological responses are up here, trying to prepare the body and keep up with the physiological challenge, the cognitive challenge, the mental challenges that are going on, means that the body is absolutely at its limits. And if we keep them up there all the time, then we're into chronic stress. That's what we're causing them. Even if it starts in a place of pleasure or joy, we keep them up there. And we live, this isn't just a problem unique to modern dogs. This is a modern human problem too. We put ourselves through this too all the time. And we start to talk about this phenomenon referred to as trigger stacking, where there's one stressor on top of another stressor on top of another stressor. And there hasn't been enough time between each stressor for the dog's body to come down again. And then there's an exposure to another stressor. So the stress effects these arousal effects or stress effects are cumulative. Is there a calming effect on certain repetitive behavior? I think there is. I think a lot of dogs seem to really like that predictability. They love patterns. And I find a lot of those dogs that go up and up and up and up and up and up and up, they tend to really like patterns. And I know my guy, who's definitely an up there dog, like a lot, he will love that repetitive ball throwing. You just throwing the ball for him to catch. Doesn't have to be going anywhere. And there definitely seems to be, some real addictive quality to that. I'm using the term addictive very, very loosely there. And I think it's probably because the effects of high arousal or high stress are addictive, and that's because the chemicals that are produced make the animal feel nice. Dopamine feels nice when it's released in the brain, and certainly dogs will want to put themselves into situations where they do those behaviors, get that dopamine kick, and it means they're going to do it again and again and again. My girl sometimes walks around the house with her head very low or low to the ground after we returned home from a year away. I don't know how to help her get more confidence and happy around the house. Okay, so you were gone for a year and you came back and you see her doing that. So the first thing is we have to collect the data. When does it happen? What's cueing that behavior? Might be something you're doing, might be something that's happening. We need to collect the data. We need more information about this. Our favorite thing is sniffing. Absolutely. It should be all dogs' favorite things. And sniffing seems to be something that uses, it has such a direct line into the brain. So it comes from here to right there in dogs, okay? And it uses a huge chunk of their brain. The olfactory centers in the brain are much bigger relative to the size of their brain than ours. And if we can get them really engaged in that, then that can absolutely help the brain be less involved in the whole sniffing thing. Watching the news around COVID stuff is my trigger stacking. Absolutely. Spotify and cake bring me back down to earth again. Big time. I'm with you there. Yeah, watching the pandemic news, it's a real trigger stacking thing, isn't it? Because every day there's another stressor being added. Every hour there's the numbers of people that have caught it, the numbers of people who've died, the number of people in ICU. I mean, and the real difficulty with this one is that it's not predictable and we've no control over it. So it is by far the definition of a massive stressor in our lives, and has been nearly a year now. Check out 100 Days. Absolutely. I'll always plug that. Sid is very like Decker. Sid is a Doberman. Yeah. There's going to be lots of similarities. There's our calming effect on certain. Yeah, we did that one. Our favorite thing is sniffing. Yeah, we love sniffing too. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, I'm glad. You and me both, Kim. Yeah, I think that's good. So I guess we have to be really careful then with the sorts of activities that we do with dogs, because we could be, when we think we're reducing stress or facilitating reduction in stress, we could actually be adding to it. So let's talk a little bit about what happens to the brain on stress. And I realize I'm flying through this, but I'm going to add a ton of resources, and you can request some specific ones too if you want down here. So one easy way that's very, very simple, it's not terribly accurate, but it's just illustrative. It's from a doctor called Dan Siegel, whose work, if you're interested in stress, and particularly if you're interested in like the adolescent brain, so we talk a lot about adolescence in dogs, and there's lots of similarities. Dan Siegel's work is something to look up. So I want you to put your hand up. You're not taking an oath, don't worry, you're not signing over anything. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the brain works in relation to stress. So the first thing to understand is down here, I have to do this opposite when I'm looking at the camera. So this area down here represents the base of our brain, which is here. And the base of the brain is at the top of the spinal cord. And that really just looks after automatic stuff like breathing, right, blinking, things like that, things that we don't have to think about doing. And it's a good thing we don't have to think about doing them, because if we did, that was what we would spend all of our time doing. So this kind of lower area down here, this base of the brain that looks after just kind of involuntary processes, so physiological involuntary processes. Words with friends in French. Wow, that sounds tough. Yeah, my dog gets stressed when she detects the scent of other dogs. Right, okay, so some dogs, it can work with the smell of other dogs. Very familiar with hand-brain analogy. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so you've seen Dan Siegel's work. That's cool. Yeah, so if we curve our thumb in like that, so do this now. I'm just trusting that you're all doing this, and it's not just me looking weird. So we curve that in, and on top of this base of the brain sits a system called the limbic system. So it sits on the top of that. And the limbic system is a system of all different bits and pieces. The amygdala you might have heard of. And the limbic system looks after kind of survival-based responses, emotional responses. There's some memory stuff that goes on there with the hippocampus as well. And then on top of that, when I'm moving around the flat day today. Yeah, I'm going to come to that, Oliver. And then on top of that sits the cortex. So this is the top of the brain. The cortex region with the frontal cortex up here and the cortex down here. And this is the decision-making, impulsivity control part, reasoning, thinking part of the brain. Okay, now when the limbic system is engaged, this bit down here, the limbic system, the best way to do that is that way. The limbic system takes in information. The thalamus is the center of the brain that takes in sensory information from around the world. And sends it to the limbic system for processing. And the limbic system decides whether this is something that's going to threaten survival or not. And if it decides that, yeah, this is going to threaten survival, it kind of cuts off the workings of the cortex. So the information can't get out back down to the brain, back down here to the part of the brain that's going to make movement happen. And it can't get up there into the brain where we can process it in a slightly more sensible way. So when it's down here, the body is just reacting to stuff. It believes its life is in danger. And the brain, the mammalian brain, is a tricky old thing, because to be perfectly honest with you, we have to work really, really hard to be happy and chilled in the world. Our brain is erring on the side of caution all the time. And it's going, oh God, you're going to die. Oh God, this is going to kill you. This is going to kill you. And we have to work really, really hard to get those messages up there into the cortex. So when the limbic system is engaged, when the animal is stressed, when there's some sort of challenge facing it, it's hard to get into the thinking part. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? Right? If you think, because my nervous system was messed up after a TBI. Oh dear Lord. Right. Okay. So that's really, really difficult. And not to get too personal, Sheila, at all, but I presume you went through some sort of therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that to help with that. Yeah, no, not fun at all. And long-term ramifications, I am sure, in relation to that. So when the animal is stressed, it's going to be far less easy for that animal to think things through. So we're going to have all these reactive things. And remember, the more they're exposed to stress, the better those signals get at being processed here and never getting up here. So the more it happens. Now, we also have to be mindful of the adolescent brain. During adolescence, which for dogs can start around 5 months and could go on for a couple of years. But people, I mean, it goes on for like a decade. This part of the brain, this cortex, is being restructured. Okay, it's been refined and restructured after the building that's gone on through development and puppyhood. And when that's happening, all of the messages are kind of rerouted to the limbic system. And, you know, we've all been teenagers, we've met teenage dogs. They often can have, you know, slightly emotive responses. It can take a little while for them to recover from stuff and that kind of thing too. And that's because there's brain stuff happening. They're not being bad or anything like that, but it's because it's happening in the brain. So we have to work really, really hard to be chilled out, really, really hard, and that's what we want to kind of get going with. So what are the things that we can do? So you've just described Finn's issue with stress. Poor Finn. Buffy is full of stress. Poor Buffy. Sorry you're late. Don't worry, you can tune in. Pattern games. Yeah, so pattern games are from Control Unleashed, Leslie McDevitt's work, and it's probably some of my most favorite work. I'm not a massive fan of kind of regrouped kind of programs and things like that, but yeah, so anything that's predictable increases predictability is going to work. So dogs like patterns, they like routine. We talked a lot about that yesterday. Vision therapy, I had a lot of visual processing issues and other sensory sensitivities. Talk about trigger stacking, absolutely. Can educational behavioral modification flooding exacerbate stress and heighten fear responses? Yes, I think so. I think if we understand how the body processes stress, if we're exposing dogs over threshold, so the definition for thresholds in dog training is very loose. It's actually way more complicated than this, but just in general, the threshold, let's talk about the stress threshold, the point at which stress starts to go out of hand. The more the dog is exposed to the stimulation that causes that, the triggers for that, the better they become at reacting to things. So they become more reactive to sounds that may have nothing to do with the original trigger. So they become far more sensitive to it. The brain gets better at dealing with it. Yes, absolutely. I believe that to be the case. So when it comes to then talking about stress busting, and I realize we're running out of time really quickly here, but I'm going to stick a whole load of stuff up here for you. This is a topic I could just talk about forever. we have to look a little bit beyond just classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Those are incomplete models, really. We have to look at a whole lot of other things, including affective state and cognitive systems and all sorts of things. We also might have to consider medication for restructuring the brain. Most of the OTC, calmatives and therapies have very little valid evidence supporting their use, so I'm very cautious about this. This is good stuff, but I need to watch from beginning again. Thanks, Julie. Wow, that totally explains my return dog. He's a teenager as well. He's almost 2.5, stressed out of his mind, coming down slowly. Yeah. So body awareness stuff. Yeah. Anything. He's a total numpty. I think that describes most teenagers. I think your parents or caregivers would probably have described you like that. I know mine certainly would have. Fight or flight all the way. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Definitely. Being a teenager is hard, right? I don't think there's anybody who looks back in their adolescence years and goes, yeah, that was a breeze. And that's all down to our stupid adolescent brains, right? Yeah, so there's lots of things we can look at. I'm going to put in lots of suggestions there for you, and you can also suggest them yourself. So the things that we want to do for stress busting then, let's wind this down a little bit. The first thing we want to do is we want to facilitate parasympathetic arousal. Now, what does that mean? Because that sounds like a lot. So when it comes to how the brain deals with stress and arousal, one of the things that triggers it are part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, which looks after automatic responses. At least we don't have to teach our teenage dogs how to drive, right? But all the things involved in doing that are, if we think about like teenagers and their impulsivity, why are they more likely to get into accidents and stuff like that? Because the frontal cortex up here that deals with like risk assessment and stuff like that is really being kind of rebuilt most of the time. So God love them. They just don't have the tools to deal with it. The impulsivity is controlled up here as well. And I mean, good Lord. Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad we don't have to teach our dogs to drive. Decker on the road. Oh my God. Carnage. Good Lord. Or manage their dating and broken hearts. Oh, this is getting weird now. Brilliant. Unless he's a collie and you're sheep. Right, exactly. Okay. So parasympathetic arousal then. There are two kind of converse systems that bring the body up and bring the body down. So the parasympathetic nervous system brings everything down. The sympathetic nervous system brings everything up. So when we engage the sympathetic nervous system, that's where we're all in there. We're all in there in that limbic system. It's all go, 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 go. The world is threatening us. We got to be careful. And it's all that fight or flight stuff. So if we're living in there, this is chronic stress time and possibly long-term damage and that kind of stuff. So we want to facilitate parasympathetic arousal. How do we do that? We teach the dogs how to chill, how to be, and then we have to bring that on the road to different situations. We want to set up settle contexts. So that might be a mat, that might be your behavior, it might be a particular picture in the environment. We do this by starting when the dog is actually going to settle. So all their needs have been met. They're tired, they're fed, they've watered, they've gone to the toilet, they've done all the things, and they're ready to settle down. So we start to think, well, how can we set a picture up that is kind of transferable that we can bring to other places? And it might start, they settle for 5 seconds first. I will take 5 seconds. And then we might build that very, very gradually. This ability to be is a skill that is so valuable as pet dogs because they have to be a whole lot, but also from a point of view of their health, so that their body can go and bring themselves down again. We need to manage thresholds really carefully. We have to stop exposing them to distress. And that can be really difficult. Sometimes that might mean that we have to change the environment. We have to change what we do with them, where we take them, how we do stuff. But we also bear in mind that we might have to, if that's not possible or not easy, we might have to consider medication that can actually do that in the brain for us. So we have at least an in. We have to give them tons and tons of outlets for eustress, for the good stress, to strengthen that part of the brain. We need to facilitate recovery from stress. So we had mentioned sniffing there. So sniffing, chewing, all of that kind of stuff, that brings the dog down. And the thing here is, between those two things, we want eustress and recovery. So we want to bring the dog up and down and up and down. It's what I call roller coaster games. So bringing the dog up and then down, and then up again and then down. So to facilitate this kind of priming of these biological systems, we want to capture calm, thoughtful behaviors a lot. That's a lot of what we're doing. We want to give them appropriate choice. Dogs aren't slaves to operant contingencies. We don't always have to be thinking, that they're not automatic, they're not robotic. They don't just react to operant cues and testants that are in the environment. They get information from lots of sources. We want to provide predictability. When A happens, this is what's going to happen to you. And that gives us predictability and controllability. And they are the two stress antidotes. They're so important. So we have to start thinking about that. We need to counter condition stress cues very, very carefully to avoid flooding. And we want to teach and drill neurologically cheap behaviors. Think of where your dog is when they're stressed. They're down here. Not a whole lot of thinking going. So if we expect them to be able to do behaviors that move a whole lot of their body, for example, or require them to turn away a whole lot from the object of their kind of arousal, the squirrel or the dog or whatever it is, that's going to be too hard for them. So we need to drill neurologically cheap behaviors that are really easy, that require very little brain input. A hand target is a good one because the dog can just touch, boom, touch, boom, touch, boom, touch, boom. And we can drill that. The more we drill behavior, the better the connections in the brain become between all of the different bits that the dog has to remember to do. So move the body in a certain way, remember the contingency, all of those sorts of things. The more we drill it, and it's easier for them to do neurologically cheap behaviors. Now, it's a really important thing, and where I'm going to finish up now, because we're coming up to 8 o'clock and there's somebody following me, is, we're talking a lot about, so-called force-free trainers, or however we define ourselves, reinforcement-based trainers. Just because we teach with food rewards doesn't make it positive. One of the massive major stressors that we see, even though we're not intentionally using aversives, from a neurologist, you did that explanation very well. Thank you, David. My goodness. I'm glad I didn't know you were a neurologist before this. I would have been under extreme stress. My degree basis is in biochemistry, so I have a little bit of an understanding of this stuff, but teeny tiny. So one of the things that I want you to think about, and one of my major goals in education of trainers and for myself, it's improving our clarity, improving our mechanical skills. So I think that is something that we don't intend to use aversives. We don't intend to use punishers. But if the environment can be aversive, absolutely. The environment is a terribly aversive place. It's full of stressors, good Lord. And it can be really difficult to control those. So it's really hard for these dogs and people as well. So we need to improve our mechanical skills. We need to get really, really clean. We need to get really, really good at setting up the learning environment so that the animal is successful all the time. And that means shaving criteria really, 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 really finely. I want you to also we tend to think a lot about the consequence end of the contingency, so the reinforcers and punishers and things like that. I want you to think about the other end, the cue end. Think about the pictures that we set up, the contexts we set up for our dogs. So like that one when I said, when you come home they hear your car outside in the driveway. How does the dog expect to feel? How can they expect to feel in this situation? That's going to drive their behavior. I think I need to be a trainer, not a groomer. I picked up like the hardest job you really did. It's really hard. You're absolutely right. My time in Anya has taught me that it's always my mechanical skills that need improvement every time. Every time we go back and we look at the trainer. That's why we film ourselves all the time and go, oh God, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? So I want you to start thinking in terms of pictures that we set up for dogs. What does the picture tell the dog to expect? How are they going to feel? And just because we think we're positive doesn't mean that the dog is having fun. And one of the most important stress busters is true play. And I would love to have time to talk to you about true play because it's like my real passion, absolutely. But that is the ultimate stress buster. What I would like everybody to do, I welcome everybody to come along and join us over on 100 Days of Enrichment. That is a stress busting program. If you want 100 days worth of stress busting stuff, and in there are facilities there to help you improve mechanical skill, to make observations about your dog, collect data. It's a really nice supportive group. I don't want to be drawing everybody away from this group, obviously, which is a magical place too. But I really invite you to come along. I'll stick the link in the thread here, which you may be able to find because there's a lot of comments there. But just we have a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions really quickly that I can answer for you before I have to go? So thanks so much. Brilliant. Sheep. Anybody got any specific questions that you'd like help with, or any specific resources that you would really like me to include? If we don't have to do it right now, you can stick it in the comment section, and I'll pick it up, or you can tag me and I'll pick it up and I'll stick those in, and we can add them there. Oh my god, you should do a Zoom True Play class. I'd pay for that. Yeah, it's a course we did with our trainers, I don't know, a couple of years ago. We did a weekend of it, and it was interesting and enlightening, absolutely, to see what people's understanding of play is, and stuff like that. So certainly we might look at bringing it online. It's a difficult one because you want to be there in the room a little bit. What an amazing vision. Thank you so much. Where can we read more about True Play? There's some stuff in 100 Days on True Play. I'm going to watch both sessions. Thank you so much. Thanks for all your lovely feedback. Oh, I love you guys. Such a nice place to be, right? Brilliant. Where can we read more about? Yeah, there's some stuff in 100 Days on True Play. I'll link some stuff here for you. It's really difficult to find because, generally speaking, we talk about play from the human point of view, don't we, right? So we talk about like tug and fetch and those sorts of things, but being playful and stuff like that. But I'll link for you some of the specific days that relate to True Play, or what I see as True Play, and I'll send this to you. You can have a look at those to start looking at those. Did a better job than the vet behaviors. Oh, good lord. Love listening to you. I'm gonna watch. Thank you. Love this. Thank you, everybody. I miss those workshops. Me too. Right? When are we going to be in a room again together, guys? Oh, thank you very much for trying and sharing experience. That was great. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna have to go. It's 8 o'clock. Bye. Take care. Any reading on stress and thyroid function, I will have a look for you. Thanks a million, guys. Bye. I know time, right?